Hey there, listeners. Thanks for stopping by to the podcast today. Please, before you're done listening to this episode, leave us a review. If you're on Spotify, you can review now, and you can also review on Apple Podcasts. But if there's any platforms that I'm forgetting about and you can leave us a review, please do so. If you're happening to watch this on YouTube, and if you don't know, you can watch these podcasts on YouTube now. Please like and subscribe to the channel and share the episode as well. So thanks for stopping by, everybody, and enjoy the episode.
Knowledge is Power is where you come to hear people's life experiences to learn from. So, without further ado, let's roll the intro.
Stay hungry, stay foolish.
We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other thing, not because they are easy, but because they are hard.
I have a dream. Will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character.
Hello and welcome back to the Knowledge is Power podcast. This is your host, Max Willett, and it seems to be a trend here we got going on. We have another returning guest to the podcast. This guest was on in episode 3, which, believe it or not, was, I think it was almost 2 years ago now. It was April of 2021, so almost exactly 2 years ago to the day. So if you want to go ahead and remind everybody who you are, that would be great.
So, hey, I'm Benjamin Blackett. I'm a life mastery consultant and transcendence facilitator and adventure retreat leader.
Yes, great. So I've known Benjamin for a few years now. That's crazy to say now. Time flies when you're having fun, I guess. But so Benjamin, why don't we just get into a very brief description of what you do for the new listeners. If you guys want to hear a really in-depth view of what Benjamin does, go back and listen to episode 3 to learn a lot more about Benjamin. But let's briefly go over, what you do, and then we're going to get into the topic of the day.
Okay, cool. Thanks, Max. So
No problem.
briefly, as a life mastery consultant, what I do is I help people pull their dreams into their lives. I help them work with their thinking so they understand how they can make results in their lives, and I help them find their pain points, and I also help them find their way to what it is they would really love for their lives to be fulfilled. And I do that through there are 2 ways to cause transformational change, and I'm a transformational coach, right? So there's 2 ways. One of them is through repetition and accountability, and the other is through immersion. And so I do immersion trainings with retreats. So those are the 2 biggest things. And then, of course, today we're here to talk about my newest venture, which is transcendence. So that's a fun thing, and I'll save that till you ask me what you want to hear.
Yeah, no. So why don't we get right into it? Transcendence. I've heard you talk about it in the past, and I'm sure it's an amazing thing because you do amazing work. What's funny is I started reading this book by Dave Ramsey called Entre Leadership. I think the title is. I sort of just picked it up and started reading it just because I've been challenging myself to read more. And I'm only on like page 22, and the amount of wisdom that's in that book, I think you would get a kick out of and really enjoy. So there's a bunch of great quotes in there. But before we get into that, I think I'd love to talk a little bit more about that and get your viewpoint on it as a life coach later on. But why don't you tell everybody what transcendence is?
So transcendence is a conscious dance practice, and the way it works is that it's like a guided meditation. It's also like taking the practice of yoga up off the floor and turning it into fluid movement. If you look at what the practice of a class is, it's like starting in stillness and taking it up into a bell curve of high activity and bringing it back down at the end of the class to stillness again to close the class out.
Very cool. So why don't we, I think it would be really interesting to hear the history. Why don't we start with the history of transcendence and how maybe you came across it?
So those are both great questions, and they're very different things. So the creator of the modality of transcendence is named Jennifer Jimenez. And Jennifer Jimenez is works with Brave Thinking Institute. She's the founder of the Health and Wellbeing Department of that institute, where I have been certified as a life mastery consultant. So she found her way through creating it through a bunch of other conscious dance modalities that she had studied, and she kind of blended them together to make this one thing. And as a modality is in existence, it's actually been as her creation. It's been in existence, I think, for about 6 years now. And she has been training people to facilitate transcendence for about 3 years, and I have been trained as a facilitator for 2 years. So the way I found my way to it was I was as a life coach. One of the things I like to do is to give workshops to help people get a feel for some of the material I work with, to help them get to know me. And I was in a training when I was talking to Jennifer. I said, Jennifer, I want to put some of these energizers that you guys do. Now, if you're not familiar with Brave Thinking Institute, you go for trainings with them, and every training that they do, they start with a whole dance session, and you got to move around and jiggle your body, because here's a thing that the New England Journal of Medicine pointed out to us back in 2013. They published an article that says that conscious or social dancing, social movement of that nature, helps increase mental acuity in all ages by 76%. Now, I thought that's pretty significant. So I wanted to be able to do that in my workshops. And I said, but Jennifer, I don't feel like I can dance. I'm like, I feel like I got 2 left feet still. And I'm thinking of hiring people to do that. What do you think? And she said to me, well, I think you ought to come train to be a transcendence facilitator with me, just for your own personal well-being. She said, I think that'll help you out a lot, and maybe you'll be able to do them from there. And I just said, okay. And it's, as a coach myself, I get coaching on a regular basis, but a lot of times when an opportunity comes, I hem, I haw, I hesitate. I'm like, oh, I don't know. Can I afford it? Do I think this is really worth the time or worth the money? And I didn't do that with this. It was like this inner thing that said, yes, do it. And
very interesting.
And so one of the interesting things that was really fascinating about the whole process of it was I went through the training for transcendence, and I got to a place of after taking just a few classes with Jennifer, where all of a sudden my body started dancing me instead of me being all wrapped up in how I was thinking about movement, which was a really fascinating experience. And I went through my intensive training to become a facilitator. And the first thing that happened with that was that I discovered I had body shame that I had been carrying my whole life, and I didn't even know I had it. Which, as something in my late 50s to discover, and as a man especially, because most men don't think, most of society, I should say, doesn't think about men having body shape issues, but there I was having it. And I started healing that through the transcendence. And then as I went through the whole process, she said the last piece was like, well, would you like to, you submit what she calls a dancertation to see if you would like to make money doing this. You have to be certified by her by submitting this thing. So I thought, well, I've gone this far, I've invested this much, I should just see how that feels to do that, and I should do it. So in doing that, I started teaching just to be ready to submit something. And as I was teaching, what I found was that I loved teaching. Like it was just came natural to me in a lot of ways. And the more I was doing it, the more I loved it. And I will tell you still that the more I teach it, the more I love it. So especially not just because of what it does for me, but because of what I see it do for other clients. Like it's pretty amazing to watch the experience.
Yeah, what's funny is that, again, it's crazy. This book, it's crazy. So there was a line in there that was talking about, teaching, right? And Dave Ramsey was trying to build his business back up from nothing after he went bankrupt. And he's like, he wants to have more people like him, right? He doesn't even consider his quote unquote employees. He calls them team members, right? And he's like, well, I need to have more people that are like me, which is kind of egotistical, but I mean, the guy got to where he was. So, but yeah. So my point being is that he was having issues and he's like, he loves to teach, right? But he was having issues figuring out how to get these people to be like him. And he's like, why didn't I just teach them? You know what I mean? So it's just really interesting. And that just sparked my mind. It's a simple thing. And I'm going to try to keep relating some points throughout this podcast to that book. But even though I'm only, like I said, 22 pages and I just started reading it last night, but I'm going to continue to read it. But so transcendence, right? So I want to hear some of the impacts you've seen transcendence do to other people's lives. Like when they came to you, what were they looking to get out of it? And what were some of the things that they got out of it and then some after or during, if they're still going? I know you can't name specific clients, but just examples of what transcendence has done for people.
Well, that's a fantastic question, and I've got a lot. I actually have several examples. One is, and it's interesting because what I find is that sometimes people are just looking for something different to do. They're like, they don't want to go to the gym, they don't want to do yoga, they want to do something good for their body, but they want it to be different from all the things that have been being done, and this is different, which is good.
Yeah.
And does a lot of different things inside of it. I mean, I've got a whole list of ways that there's transcending that happens, but one thing that jumps to my mind first is a class that I taught one night to a woman who had just injured her back, and she was in a lot of pain, and she spent the entire class lying on the floor and dancing with her fingers in her eyes only. And she said, even in spite of the fact that that was her movement ability for the day, because here's the thing, it's, as a conscious modality, it's as a conscious dance modality, it's open to all levels. It doesn't matter if you're injured, if you've got bodily stuff. I say people are welcome, whether they're professional or whether they're sitting in a chair or lying in a bed. They can take the class and still gain a lot of benefits from her. And so this woman lying on the floor, dancing with her eyes and her fingers, she said that was one of the most amazing experiences. I am so grateful I came. Thank you for that. And it helped her feel better. So, and I have witnessed as Jennifer has been teaching, I haven't had it happen in my class yet, but I have witnessed she's had people come to class who have said at the top of the class, I'm only going to be able to dance from my chair. That's all I can do. That's all my body's going to let me do. And I've noticed, I've witnessed those people being able to get up and dance, on their feet, moving around, in spite of what they thought they could do when they started the class. I have also had a woman who came and she was like, wow, this is so great. She's like, this is one of the best de-stressing things I've ever done. She's like, if I could come home and do this instead of turning on the TV on a Friday night, I know I would be so much better. It's like,
yeah, especially now. Yeah,
I know, especially with the way TV is now, right? It's terrible, but that's a whole nother story. But
yeah.
And I'm trying to think of a couple of things right offhand. I just did a live event recently where there's a woman who came to the event, and she said to me at the end of class, she's like, wow, that was powerful. She's like, I'm a dancer and I normally dance, but there's something that happened to me. She's like, this was powerful. This impressive, like that. She's like, thank you. And I have had many people who have been in that space. They're like, I didn't even know I needed this, and thank you. Because here's the thing, Max, when you get to it, the thing that happens, there are a lot of benefits from it. You can take stiffness and have it turn into flexibility. You can take self-doubt and to have it turn into self-confidence. You can take stress and stagnation, have it turn into fun and play. You can have physical tension turn into physical freedom. You can have uncoordination, the experience of uncoordination. As a matter of fact, I am in this process of, I told you about how I didn't even feel I could dance. I mean, when I was in my 20s, like I couldn't, like I said of myself that I had 3 left feet because really it was that bad. And I took a dance class because I was studying theater at Community College, Rhode Island. They said, well, you have to take stage and dance movement for actors plus 2 more dance classes in order to graduate. And I was terrified. I was like, what? I'm in trouble because I was clumsy. I didn't know my body. I was tripping and falling on a regular basis. Like that's who I was, how I was carrying myself in the world. And I took the stage and dance movement for actors, and I suddenly got a whole new level of comfortability in my body. And I took those other dance classes and I started being okay. It's not like I felt like I could start to dance. And so as I'm teaching the transcendence, I'm talking about that uncoordinated feeling and turning it into coordinated movement. That is still happening for me as I'm teaching. Like I'm getting more and more coordinated as time goes on. And, it can work at the level of emotional anxiety, it can turn that into improved resiliency. It can also work on the level of mental challenges and it helps bring more mental acuity.
I think that's all really interesting points. And the more I think about it, the more it always just relates back to something for me, which is simple, which is just self-confidence, right? Things that help you build your self-confidence. Because if you're confident in yourself, there's nothing that can stop you from accomplishing anything, right? And this definitely seems like a tool to help people capture or get that self-confidence back, right? Would that be a fair assessment?
That is an absolutely accurate assessment, because here's the other thing about it is that, as we grow through our lives, what happens to most of us, 99% of the world, is that we have life experience and we have all of society and teachers and parents and everything teaching us about all these things that we're doing wrong. And we start imprinting all of that in our bodies, in our minds, and we start having this thing of what actually happens is that the issues, our issues that we have here, get stored, and I'm pointing at my head for people listening, get stored in our body. Our issues live in our tissues. And so what transcendence does is it actually unravels those issues from being in the tissue. So you're absolutely 100% accurate. So that's
yeah. And I think something else, I mean, just let me know if I'm wrong here, but transcendence, I think, could be different for different people, right? It doesn't have to be dancing per se, right? It could be something else. It could be, I don't know, if you like bike riding, or mountain bike riding or something like that, or playing golf, or you could apply it in these different circumstances and just be mentally aware of what you're doing and in that way, maybe, if that makes sense. Would that
I hear the correlation you're trying to make, and as far as what you do in other, like if there are other things that you love doing, if you love biking, if you love if you love golfing, if you love any of these other physical activities that aren't necessarily transcendence, is it the same? Not necessarily, but does it open you to be more proficient in your abilities in those? Yes, it does.
Okay.
Yes, it does.
What would you say, like, to somebody listening right now, what would be a starting point for them to get introduced to transcendence? What's something like, or an exercise or something they can do to maybe start getting into it and as a good introduction to transcendence?
So, one thing I can tell you is that there's a Facebook page, I believe it's called Transcendence Global. Transcendence Global. And on that page, you can find not only myself, but there are 60 transcendence facilitators globally right now. And very often they will list classes that they're offering. So many of them have an introduction, including me, as a matter of fact. If you as a matter of fact, I can tell you that right now. If anybody is interested in going to my website, you go to acreativehealingplace.com.
I will link it in the description of the podcast.
Yeah, put that. So get the link in there. You go to my events page and you pick any one of the transcendence classes that's on my calendar. And if you're listening to this podcast and you're interested in trying a class, the first class is for free by typing in Life Mastery as all one word, all capital letters. That gives you free access to the class. So, and the classes, generally speaking, are an hour, hour and a half.
Okay.
And
Yeah.
yeah,
So my next question for you would be, how can somebody integrate their experience of transcendence when they're doing this exercise or dancing with you into their daily life? And what might be some results that you can see from applying that? If that makes sense.
that's a great question. So, well, just to tell you, so one of the things that's most important, of course, is first that we get connected with our breath. And most people don't even remember that breathing is it's a real thing as far as like being aware of. Most of us go through most of our lives not even paying attention to the way we're breathing. But here's the thing, we have our sympathetic nervous system, which is our fight, flight, and freeze system. And then there's our parasympathetic nervous system, which is our rest, digest, and create, right? And we are more creative, more productive, more friendly to ourselves when we're in that rest, digest, and create. So a way to do that, to get there quickly and easily, is to just take a couple of, actually 3 breaths. Count of 3. You can do this with me right now. Taking a breath in through the nose, and then blowing out through your mouth like you're blowing through a straw. Breathe in through the nose and blow out through your mouth like blowing through a straw. Breathe in through the nose and blow out through your mouth like blowing through a straw. Now, with just those 3 breaths, Max, let me ask you this. Do you feel better? Do you feel more relaxed?
Absolutely.
Right? And
Absolutely.
that's breath. So the dance works with the breath,
Mhm.
and using that throughout the process. And then there's the whole 10 stages of dance to bring people through. And one can apply it to their lives just by playing a song and moving to the song with the intention of putting one of those stages on through the song easily.
Very interesting. Very interesting.
I've been doing that daily for almost 4 months now, and it's definitely shifted the way I am in the world. So it's
Yeah, and I always like to relate things that I talk to people on my podcast about that back to something that I like understand, and I know it's pretty simple, but baseball for me like is how I would relate this back, right? If you want to be successful in anything, like you just said, if you want to be relaxed, you have to breathe, right? When you're hitting, when you're on the mound or you're in the field, you got to understand your surroundings, you got to know what's going on. And a great way to do that is just to relax and take a deep breath, right?
yeah.
And no matter whether you're playing baseball, getting ready for a big meeting and at work, just no matter what it is, you might be nervous about anything. And you're absolutely right. And that's something that people, I feel like, are reminded about, but easily forget about because it's such a simple thing. Like it's such a simple fix, right? Just literally taking a deep breath and just relaxing and clearing your mind and understanding what's going on and not making an impulse decision or something like that too.
Well, the whole thing about the breathing is that it gets you to relaxing, because what
Right.
happens, it's actually physically impossible to be in your sympathetic nervous system when you do that breathing in that way. It's like, this is a scientific proven fact. Like you can't be, because you can take a deep breath through your nose and be running, and you can still be in your sympathetic nervous system. Or if you're breathing through your mouth and you're running, you can still be in your sympathetic. But if you consciously breathing in through the nose and blowing out through the mouth, it's really, really giving you attention on the breath, and it automatically slows you down. So that, and all of that comes in closer. It's not that you have to focus, it comes into focus. You know what I mean? It's a difference between letting something in and forcing something in. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Because again, I'll relate it back to baseball, right? If you want to, you want to slow down an at bat, you want to slow down a meeting, right? You don't want things to get away from you. You know what I mean? And being in the moment, being in the zone, you hear that a lot in sports.
Mhm.
That helps a lot. Just slowing things down, getting control, and understanding what's going on. Yeah, that makes perfect sense. Um,
Mhm.
Something else I'm really curious about. So how long has transcendence been around? Like when was it created?
So, the roots of transcendence come actually from a woman named Gabrielle. What's her name? Gabrielle. Hold on one second.
That's okay.
Gabrielle. Gabrielle Roth. I just didn't trust myself to have the name correct on the way back. Anyhow, she was a woman who created essentially conscious dance as a thing, as a way of moving, back in the 70s. She's no longer with us, but there are a few other modalities that exist as a result of her efforts in the world, including ecstatic dance, if you've ever heard of that, which is different from transcendence. And there's also a thing called Nia, which is different from transcendence. But those are, all modalities that kind of blend together. So essentially, the roots of it from the 70s. Transcendence itself as a modality this is that you can bring intention to and use to focus. Like, I help people work on bringing their vision into focus. I help them let go specifically of, I guide them into, well, so what is there that you've got to let to go today? Is there pain? Is there anxiety? Is there stress? Is there worry? Is there grief? Is there whatever there is? So I have people set, what is it that we're trying to get rid of and what are we trying to put in its place, whether that be joy or love or abundance or peace or strength or, any added things like that. It's from a lower vibration to a higher vibration. So it works in working with that.
Right. Interesting. So my question was tying into that. How do you think transcendence has evolved over time? And can you think about specific events that might have happened that helped it evolve into what it is today?
Well, now that's an interesting question and a good question. I don't know if I can give you uh calendar things,
That's
but I
okay.
can give you, you know, when I started studying transcendence, some of the things that were uh brought to mind was, for example, and I can't show it to you here, unfortunately, because of course we're on audio, but there's a video of a man who's walking only, he's using these brace canes that go up your wrist,
Right.
he's walking that way, but then there's this music playing, and there's I don't know, he's at some event, who knows, a wedding or whatever, and all of a sudden the music's playing and he starts dancing, and he throws the canes away and he's dancing completely without them. Like, it's that. um there's a reel of footage of very different people from all different places, from all different walks of life, talking about the experience of dance. And they talk about how it opens you, how it makes you breathe better, how it makes you feel free. And the thing that I would say, as a teacher, as somebody who's been practicing it now for a couple of years, on a regular basis. I mean, I've been teaching a minimum of 2 classes a week through Zoom, and I still do. As a matter of fact, right now I'm teaching not a week, a month. Generally speaking, I'm teaching 3 classes a month through Zoom, and I do personal classes at various different places too. I have given classes at festivals. There's a spiritual center nearby that I do. In any case, the point I'm trying to get at is that what I witness and what was given to me as a student was the born witness of, this is the transformation that happens. It's hard to show you, but I'm not sure, you might have met me enough before transcendence, you may have seen the difference in my posture from the way I walked then to the way I walk now. I would say that when I started transcendence, I walked with almost an apologetic little hunch in my shoulders. Like, I don't know really how to describe it, except that there was a little, like I was, a little closed in. Our bodies speak volumes about who we are. And when we carry ourselves with our arms crossed, for example, we're saying we're afraid of the world. We want to keep people back, right? Where that's an automatic, like, stay away from me. If you've got your arms crossed, it's like, I'm not letting you near. And when you're hunched over and huddled over, which many of us are because we spend so much time sitting these days, especially since the beginning of the pandemic, right? Like, we're all working at computers, and they're saying that sitting is the new smoking as far as the next worst thing for our bodies, right? And so you got to get up and move. And so I carry myself with my shoulders back, my head up, like I feel full and like I claim my space in the world. And this is what I see with people who practice it. This is what I see. And, I have witnessed actually a woman who was an adopted child heal birth trauma from her birth parents without even knowing that she had it, because of coming to a transcendence class. Like, it can be that powerful.
Yeah, right. Like it helps you discover problems you might not even be aware of, essentially, and fixing those problems, right? Like if you're, I don't even know, like, but that's a great example. Something like that, something trauma, somebody doesn't even realize they have, and it's because they just lived with it. It's all they've known, right? You know what I mean? And that's really fascinating because again, like it just relates back to being self-confident, and all these small things that you can practice in your daily life, like transcendence, like breathing, all can help build up together and help you become a more confident and better person. And it might be in different ways. And that sort of brings me into my next question. And so you mentioned sort of the backstory and the history in the beginning of the podcast. And what role do you think faith or belief plays in achieving a state of transcendence? And can it be achieved through purely secular means?
Through purely secular means, by that question, do you mean relative to a specific religion, or?
Yeah, right. Like let's say if somebody isn't spiritual, right? They're just and maybe they're slightly closed-minded, right? And you're trying to introduce transcendence. What would be a good way to introduce this to them?
So, well, that's a fantastic question. I love that question, actually, because here's the thing, right? There's so many people walking around today who, actually, I'm reading a book. I know I do my morning mindset book studies, right?
Yeah.
Right now,
Facebook Lives, you got to follow Benjamin.
Yeah, Facebook Lives, Monday through Friday. And we're doing the book right now, The Physics of God, which talks about how the deepest theories of science explain religion and how the deepest truths of religion explain science. And we're only a few days into this. You would love this book, Matt.
Yeah.
You should. Amen. We just started this week. We're 5 days in, and there's a big. He opens the book with a discussion of how science has actually become a religion in its own right. Like, there's the materialist scientists who are saying religion isn't right and can't be true, right? And that has become a religion in and of itself. And so there's so many people in the world now who have got this, they call it atheism, and yet it's not, it's just it's a transference, if you will. So, and I am not what I would call religious in any way. Like, I have not claimed a religion. I don't say I don't speak to anything, but I speak on spiritual principles in terms of, we are all one. There's an energy, there's a life force that brought us forth from somewhere. It's not all disorganized nothingness, right? So for somebody who may be struggling with that, like the first thing I say automatically is like, whatever you choose to think of as life force, whether it's Mother Nature, whether it's your breath, whether it's the galaxies, looking at the stars, whether it's the ocean or the mountains, or if it's God or Buddha or Muhammad or whatever there is that gives you that sense of higher being of some sort. And it doesn't have to be anything specific. And I certainly, when I teach, I don't teach to anything specific. So am I answering your question? Am I getting to?
Absolutely. That is such an amazing perspective to offer. That it literally gave me the chills listening to you say that. That's such a great perspective. And what's interesting is I wrote the only real paper I wrote in college, right? I took a philosophy class, right? And the teacher, I can't remember the professor's name. He was an older gentleman, nice guy, but at the end of the class, we had to write sort of a philosophical paper on morals or something like that. And I wrote how, morals come from religion and people don't even realize it, right? From this background. It's like, well, what do we determine to be moral? Don't kill somebody. Right? It's ingrained in us. It's not a good thing to kill people, right? It's in the 10 Commandments, right? And that was ingrained in our creation. People don't even realize that. They think, well, I was just born that way. Well, there you go, right? And your morals and sort of just how you were talking about whatever way you choose to get to this certain point, right? If it's through secular means, right? That I can't wait to re-listen to that after I post this podcast, because that's such a great perspective, and that sort of just reminds me of how I wrote this paper and how things happen. You don't even realize it. And moral beliefs are in you already. Religion shaped that, right? The 10 Commandments shape that.
Well, here's an interesting thing, Max. There's two things actually, because you actually just brought up something fascinating as far as my personal answer to the question too, because I too took a philosophy class in my very first semester of college. And I love that you reference that for yourself, because when I took my first philosophy class in college, I thought I was an atheist. I thought I had certain proof that God did not exist. And I couldn't create for you again in a million years the arguments that professor gave me during that class. But I said, okay, there has to be something. There has to be this something from which we all came. There has to be this piece, right? And an interesting thing about when you talked about the 10 Commandments and what we learn and what we don't learn, the thing is we hear them and we yes, they come and we've been taught to a certain degree. But the one thing that most people get wrong is there's this love thy neighbor as you love yourself. And we think this is the way I used to think anyhow, and many of us do. We think, oh, well, I have to love other people. I have to love other people. I'm not doing well enough if I'm not giving to other people. And like, that's all there is. But it says, love thy neighbor as thyself, which means one has to love oneself first. And the truth, today's society, most of us don't grant ourselves the freedom to truly love ourselves. And in relationship to what our conversation is here today, Max, transcendence really helps open up the channel for one to learn to love themselves, even if it doesn't know that that's what they're coming for.
Right.
Like most people don't. And yet then there's this thing, all of a sudden we do that. But we can't really love other people well until we love ourselves, because if we're being hard and judgmental and accusatory of ourselves, what do you think we have to give other people? Right? What comes out is judgmentalism, accusation, and often much lower vibration stuff.
Right.
So,
and you say don't be judgmental again. Like there's this show on Apple TV called Ted Lasso, right? And in one of the episodes, I can't remember which one, the lead character Ted Lasso, I don't know the actor's name. I don't really try to memorize their names. It's whatever, but he says be curious, not judgmental, right?
Mhm.
And that changes your perspective, right? If you meet somebody and they're a jerk, don't be like,
Mhm.
I don't want to talk to that guy. I don't want to get to know him. Burn that bridge. I don't ever want to go there. And
Mhm.
you're, well, why? Why? Maybe it might not be his fault. He's like that. He's still choosing to be like that, but something happened that made him be like that, made that person be like that. Right. So
Mhm.
be curious. And instead of burning the bridge, you don't have to be like, well, what happened? Why you like, you know what I mean? You don't have to be all up in his face about it, up in their face about it. But, there's ways to get around that, to be curious and not judgmental. Right. And then
Mm.
this ultimately, like I said, I think the big takeaway for me from this conversation we're having is different ways to just become self-confident in yourself. Because if you're not confident in yourself, you'll go nowhere. And don't be afraid to make mistakes. Another quote from the book I'm reading, it's from Henry Ford, and a lot of people don't like him, but regardless of that, this quote is from Dave Ramsey's book, and some of it's a quote, and it's making mistakes and learning from them is crucial to winning. Learning from those mistakes is less painful. Henry Ford said, those who never make mistakes work for those of us who do. Right? Moral of it, forget about Henry Ford. Just think about the words that he said. Like, don't be afraid to make mistakes. It'll help you ultimately in your self-confidence. And I think that's the biggest takeaway from this conversation right now. And transcendence is one of those avenues to do so. And it sounds incredible. And we're definitely going to link your website in this podcast description for anybody listening who wants to talk to Benjamin about transcendence and what it can do for them. And my final question for you is so way back when, I'm not sure if I asked this question, but in a lot of podcasts, I asked, what piece of advice would you give to somebody? But I want to try to integrate transcendence into this question. And what advice would you give to someone who is struggling to find meaning or purpose in their life and is seeking a sense of transcendence or connection to something greater than themselves?
That's a fantastic question. That's a power punch question. So the thing for me always comes first, coming back to your breath, and then allowing yourself. And we've all got music that we listen to, and we don't all listen to the same music, and that's okay. We don't have to. We're not supposed to, because there are many different personalities, beingnesses, as there are thumbprints in the world. Every thumbprint has a whole different thing attached to it, right? And so, you may want to listen to hip hop, and that's not necessarily my thing. Sometimes it is in some specific ways, but you may want to listen to heavy metal. That I was actually talking to somebody earlier today. That's not my thing. There was a time when it was my thing, but it's not. But it doesn't matter what the thing is, right? The thing is, find your thing. If it's heavy metal, if it's hip hop, if it's country, if it's folk, if it's jazz, if it's top 40 music, if it's 80s music, if it's the music by the decades, the way we have set up because of the past 100 years of music history, or if it's classical music, if it's whatever it is, find that music that speaks to you and move to it. Just move to it. And 3-4 minutes, that's all you need. Pay attention to your breath and move to some music, and it doesn't matter what it is. It really doesn't.
Well, Benjamin, this has been an absolutely amazing conversation. I really appreciate you approaching me, wanting to come back on and talk about transcendence. Definitely opened my mind up and exposed me to this. This is incredible. Like I said, we're gonna we're going to plug you in the description. Anybody listening who wants to get introduced to Benjamin, website will be in the description of the podcast as well, and on YouTube. You can actually watch these on YouTube now, Benjamin. So, but yes, so you actually wanted to do a giveaway at the end of the podcast. So if you wanted to go ahead and talk about that giveaway, that'd be great.
Yeah, so just for having sat through and listened through this whole interview, I would love to gift you an ebook. It's abundance affirmations, and it's a way to work with affirmations to help you bring abundance into your life. And it's just a thing I give away as a coach, and to help people start getting acclimated with ways to think better for themselves too. So, and it goes along with transcendence, but it's not necessary. It's a standalone, just little book. There you go, little ebook. Click on the link that we put in here, and you get it for free.
Absolutely. Well, yeah, like I said, I really appreciate you coming on, Benjamin. Absolute pleasure talking to you. Thank you very much for coming on.
And thank you, Max. It is a pleasure and a privilege, and I love watching you grow through your podcast experience too. You are a sharper interviewer. You are a higher engagement level in different ways than when you started, and it's fun watching you grow too. So, just for those of you who are new to his podcasts and you're like, "Wow, this is great. He's growing." Wait, I can't wait.
Yeah, you gotta go back and listen to episode 3 and see how my questioning was, and very embarrassing. I can't. It's tough for me to listen to sometimes.
It's good because it shows, and it's good for people to show. This authentic you is what the world needs more of, and you showing up this is, and this is what I try to help people do, is help them be them authentic selves, and we need this in the world. So you're doing it, and the world needs you for that. So thank you for that. Thank you.
Well, this conversation definitely has helped me do that, and thank you very much, Benjamin, and thank you all for listening to the Knowledge is Power podcast. So for those of you who don't know, we actually have a Patreon for Knowledge is Power, patreon.com/KIP-POD, and you can subscribe for as little as $3 a month and get episodes months sometimes in advance. And basically all these episodes are pre-recorded and posted weeks out, and they're instantly uploaded to patreon.com, so that the day or two after they're recorded, they're up there and they're available on Patreon before they are on widely available platforms like Apple Podcasts and Spotify. So subscribe to Patreon and show your support to the podcast. It would mean a lot. You'll get previews of upcoming guests, and you can even request questions. Maybe if you guys want to do a little research on the guests that are upcoming, I'll even have an excerpt in there, and you guys can ask questions, and I'll make sure to give you guys a shout out as well. So go subscribe on Patreon, and also make sure to follow us on Instagram and Facebook. Also, all Benjamin's links will be in the description of the podcast, so don't forget to go follow Benjamin as well. Thank you again, Benjamin. Thank you all for listening to the Knowledge is Power podcast, and I will catch you in the next one.